Welcome to Payments on Tap, your executive happy hour for payments leadership, serving insights, and crafting the future of payments together. We're going to celebrate Women's History Month with a special series, Women in Leadership Payments Edition. In this series, I'm sitting down with some incredible women across the payments ecosystem, leaders who are shaping strategy, driving innovation, managing risk, building partnerships, and influencing the future of financial services. We're going to talk about their career journeys, the pivots and lessons along the way, the mentors who made the difference, and what it really takes to lead in an industry that's constantly evolving. And this series, it's about visibility, it's about impact, and it's about learning from women who are not just participating in the payment space, but actively redefining it. So grab your coffee, your notebook, or maybe something even a little stronger, and let's get into it. Welcome back to Payments on Tap. So excited for this episode in the Women in Leadership Payments Edition series. Throughout the series, again, we're highlighting the stories behind the titles, the journeys, the pivot, the mentors, and the moments that shape women leading in payments today. So joining me today is Nasreen Quibria. Nasreen is the Senior Vice President of International Advisory at PNC Bank, and some of her accomplishments include 2 patents in artificial intelligence. Nasreen, I'm so grateful you're here. Welcome to Payments on Tab. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself, the work that you're doing with the listeners today before we get into your story in payments?
Sure. It's one of my favorite trade associations, and I had the privilege of serving on the board previously. So it's a special moment to be having this conversation with you. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I joined PNC Bank about 6 months ago, and I've spent more than 2 decades working across global financial services with a focus on payments modernization, digital assets, and product strategy. And in my career, I've had the privilege of holding leadership positions at Visa, ICBA, CGI, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. I also founded a consultancy focused on payments research and strategic advisory. And much of my work has centered on industry initiatives like ISO 20022 adoption, API standards, and cross border payments innovation.
Very impressive. I'd like to start at the beginning, Nasreen. So, what was your first role in financial services, and how did payments find you, or did you actually find payments? How did you get into the space?
Great question. So, interestingly enough, my first role in financial services was actually in risk management, Marsh and McLennan, an impressive firm. And on paper, my career path was very clear. The head of the Boston office, he had sat me down. He even walked me through the trajectory my career could look like, but I didn't feel challenged. I've always needed a lot of intellectual stimulation. And over time, I realized that that path wasn't going to be the right fit for me. So I made the decision to leave and explore other opportunities. And it still took a few more iterations and a couple of career pivots before payments finally found me. I actually fell into payments by fortuitous circumstances. I was finishing my business degree when the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston came looking for someone who understood consumer behavior around emerging technology. And it was very early days of mobile and contactless payments, long before it became mainstream. Who would have guessed that it would take a couple of decades and a pandemic to really drive adoption? And what drew me was the mix of technology and how people actually pay for things. So payments are like the circulatory system of the global economy, the engine that keeps the money moving in the background. And once I recognized that, I knew I wanted to stay in the industry.
That's where it clicks for you when you see where it touches, who it touches, and how big it is, right? Very,
That's right.
very interesting story. So, early career moments can be defining, sometimes in uncomfortable ways. So, can you share maybe a challenge in your early career that really shaped how you lead today? And along that same line, a lot of times when we're dealing with challenges, we feel like, well, maybe I'm in over my head, or maybe I don't feel like I belong at the table just yet. How did you work through that challenge and any feelings like that?
So One of my biggest challenges was walking into rooms where I didn't look like the typical person at the table. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people can certainly relate to that. I had to prove that I belonged there by being sharper and much more prepared than anyone expected. A mentor once told me, because you're young, and so this is very early on when I embarked on my career, he said, you should know more than everyone else in the room. And that really stuck. I learned that preparation is power. And when you know your material deeply, you carry yourself differently, you ask better questions, and people feel that difference. So that habit of over preparing has really shaped how I show up in the industry.
I myself am a preparer. I felt like that going into rooms, and especially when you are younger and you're walking into a room of seasoned professionals that have this experience, it's like, how do you get to that level? How do you walk into that room and feel like you know more about the topic? So, really good points there to just make sure you know your stuff when you're sitting down, and confidence will come along with that. And, the fact that you had the conversation with your manager or supervisor before going in there, and he kind of prepped you to say, you want to make sure you know your stuff, things like that. That makes me want to pivot a little bit to kind of mentorship. This is something that comes up again and again in these stories when we talk about anyone moving through their career, but especially about women in leadership. So it sounds like you did, but did you have mentors who played kind of a significant role in your journey in payments?
Well, and this is a conversation that you and I had before. So I want to talk about not only mentors, but sponsors as well, because both of them and a number of people have had significant influence in my life. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate to have both mentors and sponsors who showed up at pivotal points in my career. And they've shaped me and my trajectory in very different ways. So when I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, for example, Jim Cunha, who I know you're familiar with and many are, he before he retired, he had become was the acting COO. But long before that, that's when he came into my life, and he saw the potential in me and trusted me with complex, ambiguous work, and that trust mattered far more than any title. He gave me opportunities to grow simply by believing I could handle them. But I've also had leaders who informally adopted me as a mentee, and they gave me honest feedback, telling me the hard truths and pushing me forward when I might have played it safe. And that's what mentors do. They support you, they help you get ready for the opportunities. A sponsor helps you get the opportunities. And so, in that regard, sponsors are very different. They're the ones who say your name in rooms when you're not in it. They put real skin in the game. And one of mine was George Throckmorton. He was managing director at Matcha, and unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Sponsors, they take a real reputational risk with you. If you underperform, it reflects on them because they publicly backed you. And I've been lucky to have a few of those at critical inflection points, and that's made all the difference.
There's a lot of trust that goes into putting yourself out there for somebody else. So that's not only intimidating or maybe adds the pressure, but it also is like empowering. Like, so you kind of found payments and now you're here and you've made it your career journey. What hooked you on payments? What really was the deciding factor for you to really say payments is where I'm going and where I'm going to continue in my career?
So honestly, I was intrigued pretty early on. Once I started digging into how different payment systems actually work, the plumbing behind something most people barely think about, but
Yeah.
it really became fascinating as I moved across different parts of the ecosystem. So at the Association for Financial Professionals, I saw payments through the corporate treasury lens. Then at CGI, being part of the payments leadership team, and building products for financial institutions, that gave me a strong technology and product view. After that, I founded my own boutique consultancy, which allowed me to bring all of those perspectives together and help clients think more strategically about payments, how to align business goals, infrastructure, and regulation. When I was at Visa working on global policy and cross-border issues, I saw how payments intersect regulation, geopolitics, and innovation at scale. And each of those roles gave me a different vantage point. And that layered perspective is what kept me hooked. Payments sits at the intersection of technology, policy, commerce, human behavior. And once you see it that way, it's hard not to find this industry endlessly fascinating. So I focus on expanding people's field of vision, especially these are for junior colleagues. I think I was sharing a story with you how more recently within my organization, I've established a career building session. And the aim is really for all of us at different levels to share not only our journeys, but the lesson learns, provide guidance, and even most of us in leadership positions, we can take away learnings from the younger generation because they're very adept and uh, know all forms of sophisticated technology that you may not be familiar with. But something that I try to convey, it's not just about how you do a job, but think bigger. I encourage people to learn continuously across different domains. I certainly do that myself and also think about cross functionality. So connecting the dots between teams, building influence without necessarily having authority, and creating networks, not just in payments, but beyond. And so, because this field, it's a relationship ecosystem. And so that broader perspective is what's going to help them thrive long term.
I 100% agree. And you had mentioned something, continuous learning, continuing to evolve, and specific to payments, it's constantly moving, constantly evolving, and it's doing so at a very quick pace, right? So from
Mm.
your perspective, switching gears a little bit, getting back to payments, what's one change happening in payments that you think is most misunderstood?
So that's an interesting question. And honestly, if you had asked me that 20 years ago, my answer would be very, very different. And so it really depends on the time frame. Today, I would say it's the digital asset space,
Okay.
specifically that full spectrum from cryptocurrencies to stablecoins, tokenized deposits, and central bank digital currencies. People have very strong opinions either way. Some think that certain digital assets are going to replace banking overnight, and then others dismiss it as irrelevant hype. And so the reality is, you're probably familiar, it's much more nuanced. They're already forcing banks to rethink liquidity management, shorter settlement windows, cross system interoperability. And so while adoption is still developing and relatively nascent, this isn't about, say, cryptocurrency or stable coins winning or losing. It's about how digital assets are reshaping the plumbing of global money movement.
I 100% agree. Just looking at anywhere friction is or any new alternative value mechanism coming in, I was mentioning innovation happens when there's friction or there's a problem to solve, but then there are these implications. Innovation is great, but there's these implications related to the environment in which these mechanisms are going to operate in. And, financial institutions looking at this and where do they fit and where are the impacts? It's a lot to think about when things are changing so quickly and there's impacts happening, to liquidity, to deposits, to settlement, to all of the things you mentioned. So that was a great point. Is there anywhere specifically you think that folks may be underestimating or overestimating what's really happening?
So I would say, again, it goes back to one of the areas that I was talking about. One is around stable coins and tokenized deposits. It's challenging traditional correspondent banking, and some, depending on who you talk to, they think that it's going to completely revamp how we move money. But in terms of, we're also underestimating the worth that is going to require moving in that direction. Yes, there's a promise of faster, cheaper cross-border flows by bypassing those layers of intermediaries, but they also raise very important questions about regulation and settlement finality, and how are we going to integrate with existing Nostro and Vostro accounts. So the intersection could disrupt or redefine global liquidity networks, but I think that there's a lot of work that has to come before that actually happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now changing to you and your passion for payments, right? What trend or shift in payments right now are you watching really closely and actually really excited to get to work on? What feels like an opportunity to you, right?
So I think I touched on one of them already, which is around digital assets.
Yeah.
But there are two others that I think is going to reshape payments in the long term. One is around real time liquidity and across having 24 by 7 payment rails. Now, having constant availability, it's great, but we have to also consider, for example, the corporate perspective. What does it mean for their cash management? So, companies, they need to retool how they forecast, manage their liquidity when funds are moving so quick, instantly in an hour, and it's shifting from batch-based processes into considering predictability and always on visibility. And then the other area I think that we should be watching, and I'm sure your other guests are probably talking about this, is around AI and powering fraud detection. So, leveraging that and being able to spot patterns that humans miss in real time. So, it's evolving to predict whether it's working capital or other areas. And another area relatedly is, and I think that's going to be a game changer, is around programmable payments, where AI triggered payments based on smart conditions. So that convergence of AI and programmability, that's going to be incredibly powerful. And lastly, I think governance is also vital. So ensuring transparency, auditability, and regulatory alignment. I know I just threw a lot at you.
No, that was great. No, it was great. And I think a lot of what you said in the broader ecosystem. So I had mentioned there's a lot of these pain points when things shift and these other implications. So when you're talking about forecasting tools and you're talking about fraud monitoring and AI and things like that, that brings in this whole opportunity for organizations to kind of create and innovate these solutions and be a part of this bigger environment. So no, I think that was great. And I would love to close out this episode with you giving a little word of advice, like a little piece of advice to the next generation of women entering payment, whether they're just starting out or stepping into leadership for the first time. What would that piece of advice from you be?
I would say don't underestimate the power of technical depth. So, payments might not look glamorous, but it's one of the most consequential industries in the global economy. And so, master the plumbing and you'll have real influence. Also, raise your hand before you feel fully ready. Reach out to others in the industry, ask questions. And that's how you're going to build relationships and confidence that's going to move you forward.
Nasreen, thank you so much for sharing your story and your perspective with me and the listeners today. I think conversations like this are so important, and not just because of where the industry is going, but because of who's shaping it. For those listening, thank you for joining.
Thank you.
For those listening in, this has been Payments on Tap, your executive happy hour for payments leadership, serving insights, and crafting the future of payments together. Be sure to subscribe, share, and send us your hot topics so we can put the next topic on tap. Cheers.